celebration of his 80th birthday, I decided to dedicate this week's video to Paul McCartney. Both as a solo artist and as part of the brilliant songwriting duo Lennon-McCartney, the ex-Beatle gave us some of the most popular and powerful rock and pop songs ever written. Moreover, he was, and still is, a crazily prolific writer. His love for songwriting and dedication to the craft seems to be the real spark behind his enormous success. So I thought we could all learn a lot from his advice. Let's see how Sir McCartney has managed to keep producing tons of amazing tunes in the span of his more than 60-year career. These are 5 songwriting tips inspired by him. Before we move on with the video, let me remind you that I have a free songwriting checklist ready for you in the description down below. So just check the link to that and feel free to download the checklist whenever you are ready. That checklist will guide you through some of the most common steps that songwriters employ to write a song from start to finish. In the description down here, you will also find a link to All I Know About Songwriting, which is my songwriting course. It's pretty new, it just came out, so you might want to check it out if you want to study some proper, songwriting techniques. All right, let's go on with the video. Tip number 1, be a detective. Paul McCartney is generally very open about the songwriting process behind his songs. The way he came up with timeless tunes like Yesterday, Hey Jude, and Let It Be is really not a mystery, as he gladly spoke about his songwriting process in several interviews. His masterpiece, Eleanor Rigby in particular, hides quite an interesting songwriting insight. As I found out in an interview that I am linking in the description down here, starting at around minute 140, Paul explains how a simple repeated E minor chord on the piano suggested a melody, which, moreover, suggested some words, and a name in particular. From that step, he kept working on the lyrics inspired by that melody, and he came up with the image of some rice thrown outside a church. Now, what event does this image suggest? Of course, a wedding. From there, he kept building the story, almost as a detective would do, taking the hints from his vision and assembling them into a finished structure. The song became a reflection on the theme of solitude and was partly inspired by the stories Paul would hear from elderly people in his neighborhood when he was on his scout duties. The point is, we never know what can trigger the inspiration, but we can surely work as true detectives in deciphering the images, the characters, and the events that our vision suggests. When you have a hard time writing some lyrics, try this approach. Start with just one piece of the puzzle, whether it is a chord, a little motive, a string of words, or a title. Let your imagination guide you in adding some other scattered pieces here and there. At this point, use your detective skills to put those pieces together and complete the jigsaw. You may end up with a pretty decent first draft for your song lyrics in quite a little time. Tip number 2, do it all in one take. In an interview with the BBC, which became pretty popular and that I'm going to link in the description down here again, Paul recalls his long songwriting sessions with John Lennon. These sessions would take up several hours, and they were pretty productive, as the duo always walked out of them with at least one finished song. Of course, most of the resulting tunes would later need some more work. They were first drafts, really, but they were complete first drafts. I think this is where most songwriters get stuck, especially nowadays. As you know, in the new music industry, artists have so much food on their plates that it is quite easy for them to lose focus. It is harder and harder to take 3 or 4 hours of our undivided attention and translate them into a complete song draft. We might have other tasks demanding our time, like content creation or whatever, or we may simply feel stuck because, the songwriter's block is real. But When the Beatles started becoming famous, their manager, Brian Epstein, encouraged John and Paul to write as many songs as possible, as they always needed new tunes to be released. In the aforementioned interview, Paul recalls they often had only 2 weeks to complete a whole album. In other words, they really had to finish the songs they started. They had no other choice. This is why those long and uninterrupted songwriting sessions were a necessity. Now, they might not be a necessity for you, especially if you don't have external deadlines, if you work as an independent artist, and so on. However, I think that any songwriter or creative worker, really, can benefit from this advice. Just sit down and do your thing without interruptions. When you have a complete draft, walk out of the session, let your song rest for a while, and then get back to it with some fresh ears and a fresh mind. Tip number 3, give yourself deadlines. The previous tip leads us to another precious songwriting insight we can inherit from Sir McCartney. Deadlines can be some good fuel for our creativity. If you work under contract and maybe you have a record deal, then you won't have to worry too much about this because producers and labels often give artists a timeline to follow for their next release, so you might actually work under deadlines already. But if you are an independent artist and have no deadlines to meet, you may end up postponing your work several times before you consider yourself happy with your results, or at least happy enough to bring your song to a recording studio and get on with the process. You may not have Brian Epstein inviting you to write a whole album in 1 week, but you can still give yourself some deadlines to enhance your songwriting process and even beat awful enemies like perfectionism and creative blocks. Tip number 4, employ some symmetry. Like many other rock legends, Paul McCartney didn't have any formal musical training. He still admits he cannot read nor write music to this day. Some piano lessons he took in his childhood helped him familiarize himself with the instrument and the concepts of chords and scales, but he never deepened his knowledge of music theory or harmony, or at least not in an academical way. This sort of scattered knowledge led him to a very flexible and improvisational approach to songwriting. This way, he learned some tricks that we can steal from to make our songs more interesting and functional. For example, he took advantage of chord shapes and symmetry to write some of his most popular tunes, such as the already mentioned Eleanor Rigby. You don't really need to know what chord you are striking, either on your piano or on your guitar, if it sounds good. And if you don't even know what chord to strike, you can employ some symmetrical thinking and test the same chord shapes in various positions on your instrument, for example, on your guitar. Say you are playing a D major chord, what happens if you move that D major chord down? Or if you are on a piano, what happens if you move that D major chord up? And so on. Think about the endless possibilities that you have at hand if you apply this concept to chord variations and bass lines. At the same time, you can make things even more interesting by adding some math and structuring your song with a specific pattern in mind, whether it is the number of bars, the number of chords, the number of notes in a specific passage, or the whole song. Paul often thinks in terms of symmetry when he writes his songs. On several occasions, he explained that he got this approach from Bach, the Beatles' favorite composer. Whether you are a trained musician or not, whenever you are unsure of where to go with your song, try employing some symmetry and some math. The result might be quite surprising. Tip number 5, love your craft. Let's face it, we would totally understand if Paul McCartney decided to retire from songwriting today. I mean, after more than 60 years dealing with the craft, who could blame him? He often jokes about the fact that he keeps writing songs after all these years. On several occasions, he said that he's often asked, "You have written so many songs already, why do you keep writing more?" Now, we can really learn a lot from his go-to answer. Because I love it. Paul McCartney doesn't really know where his songs come from. His approach to songwriting, as I said, is quite open and flexible, and it is often based on improvisation and glimpses of inspiration. So it's a non-linear approach. This non-linear approach helps him keep the craft interesting and fun enough to keep pursuing it, even after more than 60 years. It's probably like a constant rediscovery of something new. It's a mystery that keeps unraveling itself, but that never gets solved. To be a great and prolific songwriter, don't focus only on the craft itself. Focus on your passion and find what helps you keep your interest alive, as Paul McCartney did. Believe it or not, this might be what makes or breaks your next tunes. All right, people, I hope you found these 5 songwriting tips inspired by Paul McCartney useful enough. Let me know in the comments and let me know what other topics you want me to discuss on this channel. Don't forget to check out the free songwriting checklist I prepared for you. There's a link down here. And also, you may want to have a look at my course, All I Know About Songwriting. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to subscribe, like, share, comment, whatever. You know how it works. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day. Happy songwriting. Ciao.